Boris Johnson's visit is of little importance in terms of the actual official political response from the UK. But as you say, he's still a popular figure, if only because he now writes quite a popular column in the Daily Mail. He was a journalist before he went into politics. But there are more important people visiting Israel every day than former prime ministers. There are members of the French Parliament, members of the Belgian Parliament there, I think, at the moment. So it's notable, I think, because of the amount of attention that Boris and someone like him will get in the world media. I mean, we're talking about him now. So I think this visit, in order to show solidarity, perhaps also shows that even within his own Conservative Party in the UK, which is divided between people who supported him, people who support his successor, Rishi Sunak, on this, they are united. Boris Johnson is right behind Israel just as much as Rishi Sunak is.
However, Jonathan, there have been large pro-Palestinian protests in London and on the streets of other British cities over the past 3 weeks. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has called them, or some of them anyway, hate marches. Has there been a decision on whether she will allow another march this weekend, which of course is a significant day in the British calendar?
I think it's seen by many Britons as particularly tasteless to try and have a big march like that on this Sunday, which is going to be Armistice Day. It's when the British have effectively their version of Yom HaZikaron in Israel. It's remembrance of fallen soldiers who've served for Britain. I think to have a clash between what is going to be an official proceedings for that, an official Memorial Day, normally very somber, very respectful, and the sorts of crowds that we've seen going to these anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian parades over recent weeks, it's going to be a disaster, not least for the Palestinian cause, I would say, because it's not going to win them much support. I think it'll make them about as popular as Just Stop Oil and those other protesters who've made a bit of a point of getting in people's way in their day-to-day life. So the government has been trying very hard to control those ever-increasing protests. They've been getting bigger in size every weekend. I think the latest is that they're going to try to keep them separate, but of course there will be a desire to try to stop it all together so that there is no clash, but also not even on television that there should be a sort of clash of images. I think it's very hard to control that number of people without being seen to be too heavy-handed and stop the freedom of expression. So I think this is going to be an interesting one to watch. And if the two do meet, there'll be certainly people who are very angry at those protesters for choosing to do so on that day. And I think, again, it's worth saying that while those protests are big, and while people in the UK, especially Jewish people, are quite afraid of some of those making up those protests, they don't necessarily represent the mainstream of British opinion. The government and the opposition have been quite firmly supportive of Israel. Those protests are really speaking out against that position because they see it as very important that an alternative view should be expressed however forcibly or however loudly on the streets. But I don't necessarily think we can say it represents mainstream British opinion either.
And Jonathan, I mean, how are British Jews feeling at this time when it's become almost routine now? Every Saturday, large protests, and at those protests, some people calling for the annihilation of the Jewish state, from the river to the sea, that kind of thing. I mean, how do Jewish people feel about that?
Well, there's no two ways about it. I haven't heard any British Jews who I've spoken to who are anything other than extremely concerned and quite worried. Most that I know aren't going out, certainly not into those places at those times that the protests are happening. They're afraid. I can understand why that is. They're not friendly crowds, certainly if they know that you're Jewish or worse in their eyes, supportive of Israel and the military engagement in Gaza now. I dread to think what might happen to some of those people. But it's gone beyond that. Many people are discussing whether they should have a mezuzah on their door, the ritual scroll that many Jews have on the doorposts of their houses, whether they should remove them, especially after what happened in France with the stabbing of that woman and the drawing of a swastika on her door when she answered it. I think there's a genuine fear among Jewish people, one that we're not unfamiliar with, sadly, when there are engagements between the Israeli military and Palestinian terrorists. But I think it's much worse than I can ever remember it being, reporting on this for many years. I think British Jewish people are genuinely quite afraid. And even though the government and the police say that they're going to defend them, that they're going to stop support for extremism, I do think that the general opinion among British Jewish society and beyond is that perhaps they're being a bit too weak, perhaps they're being a bit too slow at making those arrests, at stopping some of the scarier parts of this. Just those images that one sees coming out of the tube are also terrifying.
I've seen British police stopping people for waving Union Jacks and St. George flags.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's one of the things that people have been angry about, is there have been these videos going around that waving an England flag too near to one of these pro-Palestinian marches was seen by the police as potentially inflammatory. Of course, that doesn't play well in people's minds when they see it coming out. Why on earth would you stop them flying the flag of England rather than flying, let's say, flags like the black jihad, so-called jihad flag that's been seen at some protests? I think also people say, why should they be stopped from, for example, showing the billboards on the backs of moving vehicles with the kidnapped children on them? The police were seen actually shutting down a convoy of vans that were showing the faces of those kidnapped children because they were concerned that if they encountered the pro-Palestinian protesters, there would be unrest, that there would be some sort of violence. But the idea that the police are stopping people from showing the faces of the kidnapped, that people are being stopped from showing an England flag, these, I think, are problems for British society and problems for the police, because even if they think that's the quickest way to avoid a conflict on the streets, it's clearly not the right thing to do. What needs to be done is to stop the ill behaviour.